Recently, I have been doing more advanced videos targeting other commentators. Recently, I harshly criticised the idiotic rhetoric of Duncan Garner. And now it is the left's turn to face some harsh criticism. Aotearoa Liberation League. These people have a considerable following, almost 5,000 subscribers. They might be the biggest left-wing channel covering New Zealand politics after Big Hairy News. In a recent livestream, a viewer made the mistake of mentioning the Ukraine war. Without question, both pundits began vomiting up half-baked Russian propaganda. It is terrifying how deeply Russian propaganda has penetrated Western society, including most disappointingly, the minds of leftists. This presents a good opportunity to deconstruct some of the flawed claims that we often hear. As people know, I very strongly support Ukraine. Seeing leftists repeat Russian talking points so mindlessly is one of those things that just makes you embarrassed to even be on the left. At least until you remember that this behaviour is anything but left-wing, it is right-wing in nature. And from Aotearoa Liberation League, it is not especially surprising. These people are very strong supporters of the Maori Party. The Maori Party wants to cut aid to Ukraine and has repeatedly spouted Russian propaganda themselves. So this rot runs deep. Anyway, let's get into it.
Anyway, so he says, Kiwi Rob says, I notice lefties like Aotearoa Liberation League have forgot about Ukraine. What would you say about this? I saw someone's comment, I highlighted it, it was a perfect response, but what would you say?
I would say that I have not forgotten about Ukraine, that my heart breaks for Ukrainian people every single day. It also breaks for the Russian people, both of whom are being drawn into this proxy war by the leaders of the United States and of Russia. And by the way, Ukraine has faced horrific casualties and we don't talk about it enough. So, points granted there, we don't talk about it enough.
No, but
think we had over 500,000 people, 500,000 Ukrainian people losing their lives. And their government has a big part to play in that, by the way.
Oh,
the
absolutely.
Ukrainian government, you should see videos of them hunting down the Ukrainian youth and forcing them to go into the front lines, to sacrifice their lives for a war that the United States started. Because let's be clear about this. This is a war between the United States and Russia. The United States refusing to negotiate with Russia, of surrounding Russia with military bases, of angling to have Ukraine join NATO. Things that US officials themselves, since the 90s, have been saying this could spark war. If we keep going and antagonizing Russia in this way, they could spark war. And yes, the Russian invasion is illegal and abhorrent. I will always disagree with war. As a child of war, I will always disagree with war. War is horrific. War is the most violent, horrific thing that you could possibly imagine. But at the same time, we can't ignore that it's the United States that angled for that proxy war.
Killed it.
A couple of minutes and an overload of bad takes. They claim that the USA started the war. This is utterly deluded, and it is Russian propaganda. As though US military bases in the Baltic states and mentions of NATO membership for Ukraine somehow backs Russia into a corner and gives them no choice but to start a major war. What a load of utter crap. If this justifies war, then no American war has ever been unjustified. The USA did not start this war, Russia did. Russia has agency, they are responsible for their own decisions. There was no imminent US attack on them, they had absolutely no justification for this. A mindless opposition to the USA has rotted the brains of many on the left. The USA does cause many problems, but the USA does not cause every single problem. I despise it when people pretend that each side is equally at fault in this conflict. That is a lie. Putin started the war, and nobody made him do it. Enough of this grotesque equivocating. It serves only to downplay Russia's responsibility. And so what if Ukraine wanted to join NATO? Ukraine is a sovereign state, not some kind of hollow buffer state. If they want to join NATO, that is their decision, not Russia's. Why are leftists buying into this nonsense about big powers having spheres of influence? I thought we didn't believe in this kind of imperialist rubbish. Claiming that the USA started this war downplays Russia's responsibility massively. Downplaying Russian responsibility in this way amounts to war crime denial and atrocity revisionism in my view. And they have the gall to say that their heart breaks for both Ukrainians and Russians. Would they ever say this about Israel and Palestine? Would they ever feel the need to repeatedly highlight the suffering of Israelis? The Hamas attack on Israel was infinitely more depraved than anything Ukraine has ever done to Russia. So why the inconsistency? They accused the USA and Ukraine of refusing to negotiate with Russia. In recent weeks, both countries have been desperately attempting to negotiate with Russia, and Russia has shown absolutely no interest in this. And what is this demand for appeasement? We know that appeasement is a massive failure. Have people forgotten the 1930s? You can never satisfy a belligerent, bloodthirsty dictator. Appeasement serves only to strengthen his position, embolden him, and encourage others to behave in the same belligerent way. Aggression must never be rewarded. The commentators were also going on about the horrors of conscription. And conscription is obviously horrible, but war is horrible. If you want to defend yourself, sometimes conscription is necessary. Without conscription, the Allies would have lost World War II. War is a dirty game, that is just the reality. This war was forced on Ukraine. They are not conscripting young men because they want to see them die. They are conscripting them because they need an army to defend their people. And morally condemning them for that is disgraceful. It is Russia that forced them into a position where that was necessary. And of course it is horrible, but fighting a war is horrible. What were you expecting? That a far more powerful state with a huge conscript army could somehow be held back by a few grinning volunteers? Of course not. Most stupidly, Ukraine is dismissed as a mere US proxy. Ukraine is stripped of agency and written off as a US proxy in a proxy war with Russia. I don't know when the word proxy took on this meaning. The Vietnam War is the most famous proxy war, but no serious person would claim that North Vietnam was nothing more than a Soviet proxy. No amount of Soviet support could prop up a regime that had no support from its people in the face of such vicious American attacks. You could say the same about the Soviet-Afghan War, another famous proxy war. No serious person would claim that the Mujahideen were just a US proxy. Being backed by a great power does not make you a mere puppet of that power. And without a determined, supportive population, no amount of US support is going to save you. Look at Afghanistan, look at South Vietnam, look at the Republic of Iran. Ukraine is much more than a mere proxy. They are a determined and courageous people fending off a belligerent dictatorship. They are supported by the USA, but they are much more than a mere proxy. How can you write them off as a mere proxy in light of Zelensky's recent conflict with Trump? If Ukraine was just a puppet, as is implied, that would never have happened. Dismissing Ukraine as just a US proxy is dishonest, disingenuous, and disrespectful. It is appalling, it is stupid. At the beginning, these commentators pretend to be very concerned about the Ukrainian people. I find that incredibly difficult to believe. If you genuinely care about an issue, why would you be so willing to mindlessly repeat Russian propaganda? They confidently and passionately espouse utter nonsense. I find it very hard to believe that you have any genuine regard for the people involved when you are willing to issue such flawed commentary without a thought, and with passion and confidence when you are just repeating half-baked Russian propaganda. But the decline continues.
That's what I have to say about that.
Kia ora. Potent Perspective brings up that the Ukraine has their Nazi history as well. Not just a Nazi history. You know, they have actual Nazis that the USA has armed. And so
like the Azov battalion.
It's not just a a historical connection with Ukraine and that ideology.
Rambling about Nazis in Ukraine. No Russian propaganda would be complete without this narrative. Are there Nazis in Ukraine? Of course. Every war zone in the world is home to extremists. This should not be a surprise to anyone. Palestine is home to plenty of people who are indistinguishable from Nazis. Radical Islamic militants who support authoritarianism, autocracy, and rabid anti-Semitism. But Aotearoa Liberation League does not hesitate to support Palestine. But Ukraine gets demonized due to 1 battalion. What a joke. Wartime conditions naturally produce extreme worldviews. Yes, Ukraine is home to Nazis, and many are in the military. And the Ukrainian government used them as cannon fodder in the war with Russia. So what exactly is the objection? Using bad people to kill bad people sounds good to me. Fascists being sent out to kill fascists. Good. What else would you have Ukraine do? Obviously provoking a civil war on their own side would be counterproductive. That would destabilize Ukraine and allow the Russian fascists to prevail. It is far wiser to arm the Ukrainian fascists and send them out to fight the Russian fascists. If you want to get rid of the maximum number of fascists, that is the logical strategy. And no amount of screeching about Azov will ever change that. I mean, for God's sake, the leader of Ukraine is literally a Jewish liberal. It is just comical. This commentary from Aotearoa Liberation League is incredibly dumb. It represents an uncritical regurgitating of mindless Russian propaganda. It is just stupid. 2 minutes of thought can rip any of these narratives to pieces. Don't mindlessly repeat Russian propaganda. We must stand with Ukraine. We must support them in their struggle against a belligerent, imperialistic dictatorship.